is proud to present Professor Gert-Jan Nabuurs.
Okay, thank you, and welcome all of you somewhere there in the world. So I'm happy to exchange with you my views on economics of changing forest management practices as a mitigation measure. And we're going to see in the next slide what we're going to deal with quickly. The contents of the presentation we'll look into carbon sequestration on different continents of the world. What is the state of the forest in the different continents, the state of activity management, and how that influences carbon sequestration. Then we'll look at different measures that you can take in forests to increase carbon storage, and also the measures and their economics, how they, what the costs are, or maybe what the benefits are as well. And we will quickly have a look at potentials and also how views have changed with respect to carbon sequestration in forests since the Kyoto Protocol. And we'll come to a last slide with conclusions. First, I want to reiterate to you one of the main conclusions from the IPCC fourth assessment report, the forestry chapter, which said that the main conclusion was that in the long term, a sustainable forest management strategy aimed at maintaining or increasing forest carbon stocks while producing an annual sustained yield of timber, fiber, or energy from the forest will generate the largest sustained mitigation benefit. So we're going to see what that means. First, quickly, and I think this will probably not be very new to you, a view on the world's forests there in the gray in the background, but also how forest area changes are taking place, with in red where deforestation takes place, and in green where the large afforestations take place. And you can also see certainly China, where large afforestation programs are active, but also Southern Europe, where agriculture is retreating and forest area expands. So really very different socioeconomic circumstances that determine how forests area trends are taking place. So these different trends and management schemes also determine how the different forests on continents are functioning in terms of carbon balance. And one very good example here, you look at an annual balance of the large biomes in the different regions of the world, USA for example, and you see that in the mid-1800s the US forests were a source, as a positive number, a source because of the colonization and deforestation taking place. Then agriculture retreated, afforestations took place, and you see now that the US forests are a carbon sink. Same happened a bit for Europe. Europe is this light blue line where deforestation took place in medieval times, but then also in the 1800s afforestations took place, and thus we have the sink as we see it today. Very different trends in the fast developing economies, with, for example, large emissions in tropical Asia and tropical America, this light yellow line. So very different trends going on in the state of the forest, and that also determines what you can do in order to increase carbon sequestration. So the role of land use change in the whole carbon balance. I just showed you the large emissions from in Southeast Asia and tropical Americas. These emissions from land use change have typically been around 5 gigatons CO2 per year, peaked a bit with the Indonesian peat fires, but now these emissions are going down. Deforestation really is going down. So the role of the land use change emissions in the total global carbon budget is also becoming smaller. But these deforestation trends are, of course, where we want to tackle the trends to improve the carbon balance. And as I said, in the tropics things are also changing. There are large afforestations taking place, plantation management a lot, for example slash pine plantations in the southeast of the USA for bioenergy, but also pulp and paper eucalyptus plantations in Brazil. So there's a lot of dynamics through the world market for paper and bioenergy in the tropics. In the boreal forest, a very different dynamics. Here you see a map, part of British Columbia. In the boreal forest, for example, in Canada, we have large tracts of primary forests with natural disturbances taking place. And here you see the large area, 14 million hectares of that pine forest in British Columbia, affected by the mountain pine beetle. And that makes that we think that the Canadian forest as a whole are now a source of carbon as well. So here the natural disturbances play a role. So this diagram you can take a look at later yourself as well, also goes into these different measures that you can take. You can increase the area of high carbon stocked forest with, for example, the costs. This is the cost diagram. The costs are high upfront. You can also try to maintain the high carbon stock forest. You can, for example, also increase the off-site carbon in the wood products. Very different measures. And so taking into account these previous slides, you have to look at what the trends are and what the state of the forest is in order to find this sort of most optimal carbon management. So we have now, there have been a lot of studies into where could you change forest management, could you afforest, stop deforestation, maybe store more carbon in wood products. There have been a lot of studies and also spatially explicit studies looking into what is the most optimal. And if you want to store a certain amount of gigatons of carbon cumulative by a certain year, as you see here, then you can also calculate a carbon price for that. And forest as a measure to store carbon has always been a very cost-effective measure, because you're not only storing carbon, but in the end you're also producing a wood product with income generation. So your net costs are very small, or even negative net costs, so you may even gain some income from this. And this is has been calculated in the fourth assessment report, as you see here, for the different regions of the world, Asia, Latin America, for example. What are the total quantities that you can sequester per year? And especially forestry really stands out with large amounts of carbon that you can store at reasonable, still also at reasonable prices here of $20 per ton CO2, up to the high prices of $100. So we're coming to an end. I gave you a very quick insight into this in different continents, and what the measures are that you can take, a little bit on the economics. So I showed you this carbon sequestration really consists of a multitude of measures. There's certainly not a one size fits it all. You really have to look at the different functions that those forests play, how to optimize carbon sequestration with those other goods and services. In principle, it's a very cost-effective measure to mitigate climate change. But it's also a commodity that in reality is seldom really paid for. So in practice you see that since the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, it was already quite a long time ago, you see that in practice very little has changed in forest management. I showed you that deforestation has gone down, but that is mostly because of other measures that have been taken. It's not the climate regime or the climate governance to mitigate climate change. To really work out these measures in the field and to really let them take place is a big effort. And this says still etc. to be added, and that means that you as participants, I would like you to look into some of the literature that's given along this course, and then also come up for your region and your circumstances what could work for you. Okay, thank you very much.